An act against the Constitution is void. When James Otis Jr. said that in 1761, there wasn't even a written constitution. But the principle was clear, the baseline for the American Revolution. An unconstitutional law is no law at all. When government goes beyond its limits, those are usurpations, stolen power, and they deserve to be treated that way too. But first of all, before getting to that, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Friday, October 10th, 2025. And let's start out at the source. Government has no inherent power, no intrinsic value, I guess we could say. All that power comes from the people themselves. And George Mason, among many others, he put it like this: all power was originally lodged in and consequently is derived from the people. And in the American system, the Constitution for these United States is the mechanism. Power is only authorized through enumeration of powers. The people didn't just hand some kind of blank check to government to wield whatever power they wanted. They specified exactly what powers government would be authorized to exercise. Future First Chief Justice John Jay described it like this during the ratification debates: the proposed government is to be the government of the people. All its officers are to be their officers, and to exercise no rights but such as the people commit to them. And this was so essential to the structure of the Constitution itself that they spelled it out in what became the 10th Amendment, something that Thomas Jefferson called the foundation of the entire system. He said, "I consider the foundation of the Constitution as laid on this ground, that all powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states or to the people." That was Jefferson, February 15, 1791, 10 months to the day before ratification of the Bill of Rights. James Wilson, who also served on the Supreme Court, one of the first associate justices, he locked in this hierarchy of power. Government is at the bottom, and they are the bottom of the food chain. Government, the next tier up, is constitutions, and then at the top of the food chain is the people of the several states. He said, as our constitutions are superior to our legislatures, so the people are superior to their constitutions. And with that as our foundation, we can now define the crime. What do we call it when government exercises power that was never delegated to it in the first place? Well, Thomas Paine gave us a word for it. He said, all delegated power is trust, and all assumed power is usurpation. So usurpation is the name of the crime. And by definition, it's really just an exercise of power that was never authorized. In essence, it's stealing power from those who rightly are supposed to hold that power. Because if all power is derived from the people list out the things that they want government to do in a constitution, and government is at the bottom of the food chain and they start doing stuff they aren't authorized to do, they're technically stealing power from the people of the several states. A very common dictionary definition of the time. This one comes from, there's a lot of dictionaries that we can use from that 18th century time. Thomas Sheridan's Complete Dictionary of the English Language. This is a 1789 edition. A common dictionary definition would be forcible, unjust, illegal seizure, or possession. And a usurper is a person who seizes or possesses that to which he has no right. In the very, very, very old days, usurpers were those who stole the throne, for example, came from another kingdom and took over power. But you can also steal power in other ways by exercising power not delegated to you in the first place. We can also see this in the Declaration of Independence. Most people today refer to the list of charges against the king and parliament as grievances. But the word grievance actually isn't in the text of the document. Instead, they describe things in other ways. For example, a long train of abuses, and usurpations. Now, right at the beginning, I mentioned James Otis Jr. in 1761 saying that an act against the Constitution is void. He was railing against the writs of assistance, basically the warrantless surveillance of the day. And he was saying that this was not authorized by the unwritten British Constitution, and therefore it was void. This was a common understanding that they saw all kinds of British measures as unconstitutional, whether it was that or the Stamp Act or the Tea Act or the Townshend Acts or the Coercive Acts. It is a long train of abuses and usurpations, or a history of repeated injuries and usurpations. So usurpation, an exercise of power not authorized, a theft of power, that justified an entire revolution, a separation and secession from the mother country, a war for independence. But the founders knew that any government could be extremely dangerous. This was the tendency of all governments through all time. They expand their power when they're not authorized. And the only way they do that is by stealing power, by usurping what is not there. And James Iredell, who also was one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court under George Washington, he issued the same kind of warning for their own government. He said, any law not warranted by the Constitution is a bare-faced usurpation. But it wasn't just about laws passed by a Congress and signed by a president. St. George Tucker expanded this and expanded the understanding of this, that it's any exercise of power at any time that goes beyond the limits of the Constitution. He said every extension of the administrative authority beyond its just constitutional limits is absolutely an act of usurpation. And this gets into a legal principle. My Latin's pretty bad, but I'm going to do my best. It's a legal doctrine of void ab initio. Usurpation of power, theft of power, those acts are void. It is a legal nullity from the moment it is passed, from its birth, from the beginning. That's the Latin phrase. And it never even rises to the level of actually being a law. There's no such thing as an unconstitutional law because those things are void. They are not law at all. That's how third Chief Justice Oliver Ellsworth put it. He said, if they make a law which the Constitution does not authorize, it is void. And if it's void, that means they have no legal or constitutional authority to enforce it, to implement it, to do anything with it. And that's how James Wilson described it. He said that a void act can confer no authority upon those who proceed under color of it is a self-evident proposition. And in the Kentucky resolutions of 1798, or his first draft, this ended up in the final version as well, Thomas Jefferson took no prisoners on this at all. A usurpation of power, an unconstitutional law, is no law at all. It holds no legal force whatsoever. He said, whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no force. And even his total rival, Alexander Hamilton, he took this same position when discussing the Supremacy Clause in Federalist Paper number 33. Only those acts in pursuance of the delegated powers in the Constitution are the supreme law of the land. Only those acts in pursuance of the Constitution are actually law. He said, but it will not follow from this doctrine that acts of the large society, which are not pursuant to its constitutional powers, but which are invasions of the residuary authorities of the smaller societies, will become the supreme law of the land. Now, if you're anything like me, as you go through this type of stuff, especially if it's a first time hearing it, you're probably thinking, yeah, okay, dude, this is good in theory, but government doesn't care what you say is void. They don't care about any of this stuff at all. They'll just do what they want anyways. And that's the whole point. Hamilton actually gave us a bit of a hint, a little bit of guidance on this as well. He said, these will be merely acts of usurpation and will deserve to be treated as such. Complying and submitting to complying with, submitting to stolen power, just encourages more of the same. That is not treating it as such. That's why James Iredell understood that a free people would resist any unconstitutional acts. He said the people will resist if the government usurps power not delegated to it. Actually, the people will resist if the government usurp powers not delegated to it, I think is the actual text. And Roger Sherman in late 1787, he explained how that all works in a union of states under the Constitution for these United States. When the people refuse to comply in big numbers and the states participate and back them up, there's not much the federal government can do to shove their so-called laws, rules, acts, orders, and regulations down our throats. He said all acts of the Congress not warranted by the Constitution would be void, nor could they be enforced contrary to the sense of a majority of the states. And you get the implication there. If they have to enforce something, that requires people to actually refuse to comply with them. So it's a 1-2 punch when they pass an act of usurpations, when they try to implement an unconstitutional so-called law. It's up to the people to resist that usurpation of power. And then it's the duty of the states, because they're all taking an oath to the Constitution at every level of government, to not participate in the enforcement of those unconstitutional acts. And as Sherman said, well, if the majority of the states refuse to participate in enforcement and the people refuse to comply, that 1-2 punch is going to make it impossible for the federal government. And if you think about what a big deal that is, if you compare what was going on back then, Sherman's talking about a government that would be so small in comparison to what we have today that it would be totally unrecognizable. The federal government wasn't even really relying on the states to implement anything at that time. In fact, they were going out of their way to get away from a system under the Articles of Confederation where that was the norm. And even then and there, he's saying if the people in the states refuse to participate, the feds can't do anything about it. Now, we kicked it off, and I keep mentioning him, we kicked it off with James Otis Jr., really at the start of the American Revolution, that radical change in the viewpoints of the people from 1761 through the shot heard round the world in 1775 and the War for Independence. And during the ratification debates, the fiery anti-federalist Luther Martin brought it right back to that same foundation. He said, by the principles of the American Revolution, arbitrary power may and ought to be resisted. Speaking of Luther Martin, he's actually one of the prime subjects of our upcoming book on the Anti-Federalists, and I am like 6 months behind schedule on getting this thing done. I wanted to have it all finished by April 15th because one of the chapters, the last one, is just incredible. Luther Martin's take on taxing. And so this is really, really important stuff. So I'm going to take next week off on this show to finally get this thing wrapped up because I want to make sure that this is available to as many people as possible. And this kind of research, it takes a lot of time, energy, and resources in order to get it done. So if you want to help us do this kind of work, to reach and teach more and more people with these essential foundational principles from the founders, from the old revolutionaries, and of course, from the great thinkers that they read and learned from, well, nothing helps us do that work more than the financial faith and support of our members. So if you got a couple of bucks of that quickly devaluing dirty government fiat, please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. It's all spelled out. Our membership program starts out at just $2 a month. We make it as low of a barrier to get in on this and help us out as possible. And no one punches above their weight class better than the TAC. We make that dirty government fiat go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. Again, it's 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. But if you don't want to become a member, that's totally fine. Hey, if you want to help us out financially still, that's even more fine. You can do that over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/donate. Again, it's all spelled out. There's also a bunch of free and easy peasy things you can do to help us spread the word, like hitting the like button, subscribe, notifications, reviews on Apple Podcasts, sharing links, comments in the archive. YouTube, for example, watch time percentage is really a big deal in the algorithm. A 10-minute video that you watch for 20 minutes is 200%. 30 minutes, 300%. You get the idea. I really appreciate your support, whether it's financial, otherwise, or all the above. Again, I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. But more important than anything, I hope it made you think, and I hope you learned something. Thanks again for being here. Have an awesome weekend, and I look forward to seeing you in a week when I get back on the path to liberty.